the way I think about it a little bit is like, we're kind of like building a ladder, and the further up the ladder a user goes, the more powerful things they can do. And the higher up, like the more they achieve, and they can sort of get on this journey.
Hi everyone, on today's episode, NEWFORUM is honored to have as a guest Fredrik Haga, passionate about books, crypto, startups, tech, freestyle skiing, but most notably known as the co-founder of Dune Analytics. So it's really the go-to place for wizards and users that want to dive into crypto analytics through simplified dashboards. So we will be talking about Fredrik's journey, being a Dune wizard in 2023, and really the difference between the signal and the noise. So Fredrik, welcome to NEWFORUM, and let's start if you're ready.
Thank you. Yes, let's go.
All right. So Fredrik, how did you get into Web3, and what was the trigger or event that led you to want to start Dune Analytics? Because you left in 2018. In many regards, what was a dream job? So can you take us through your journey?
For sure, yeah. I first got interested in Bitcoin in 2015. What really got me interested was, to a large extent, all the interesting questions this technology got me to. So I had studied economics. I'd always been very interested in technology in general and startups and all these things. And it was just such a mind-boggling thing that suddenly there was this scarce resource on the internet. And it led me to really dig into questions that I hadn't really asked or learned about before around what is money, what is the financial system, what's the actual plumbing and social dynamics, and like all of these really meaty, deep questions that it turns out that you haven't really thought about. You're just taking it for granted. And so a lot of that was what I found intriguing in the beginning. And then also exploring all this vibrant, dynamic online communities and all this amazing technology that's being built, and the progress and pace of all of it was just super intriguing and fascinating. And so that's really what got me started initially, and it was like a rabbit hole I just kept falling deeper and deeper into. The more I learned, the more curious I became, and sort of that was how it happened pretty right out the gate, really, just like from first discovering it to being very obsessed about it. Was just, I think, a few weeks time. So I had that interest for a few years, and then eventually I was working at a big company on some crypto projects, but this was started doing that like in 2017 when everything was hype in the ICO bubble, and then when that bubble burst during 2018. Me and my co-founder, we used to work together at like this big company, and as so many other companies, this company was like, maybe this technology is not that interesting right now after all, which I think is totally fair, just to be honest, like
especially back then.
Exactly, it wasn't this pretty immature and clunky, weird technology that is still like, sometimes you gotta wonder what's the use and how can you use it, and when does it make sense and when does it not make sense. But anyway, we had built some smart contracts and played around, and we had realized that it's really hard to get the data for analyzing and understanding what's happening, and the blockchain is made for verifying and writing transactions to the blockchain, not reading from it, and especially not over sort of large amounts of data. So that was kind of the insight that we had, that this is a problem, and we had a hunch and bet that people will build on these systems. Like, it is a very compelling and powerful thing to have a global open financial system that anyone can build on, that's composable. And so while the space was super small back then, and we had an incredibly hard time raising money or anything like that, just because we were like, hey, we're building this tool for people building on the blockchain, and the investors would be like, okay, but there's like 5 people building on the blockchain, so that's not a market. But we took that bit nevertheless. But what we, I think, did well was we understood also that the fact that the blockchain data is open is a bit of a game changer for what type of data product and experience you can do.
Actually, sorry to interrupt, to keep going on what you just mentioned, obviously, blockchain represents like the world's first open, publicly accessible, and always updating data set. So that's really your pin tweet. So can you take us through like Dune Analytics is building the world's first community data platform. So what exactly is a community data platform and why is it so important?
Yeah, I think the key, of course, the starting point are these open data sets that a lot of people care about. So if we think about data platforms historically, what they've done is built a tool for people to bring their own data sets from their own environment. Coca-Cola and big companies put some data in the data platform and their employees work on it. However, in a world of open blockchain data, suddenly there are millions of stakeholders and people interested in the same specific data set, which is very, very sort of radically different from this sort of enterprise world. And so what we're trying to do is to make it so that you're working together with other people across the world on this, as opposed to working in silos or like every question someone has. It's actually a pretty high probability that someone else also had that question and might have been poking around and trying to figure out, what's the data for this.
Of Reddit forums and all.
Exactly. Quora or Stack Overflow but these have all been not tied into data. And you can also do the analogy to GitHub in a way, where there's open source code, but that has always been just like one piece of it. And you need to run the code and you need data and so the code goes into different applications. What's interesting with having a public data set is that we can integrate. We not only take the code layer where people write analysis in SQL, but we actually plug the data in and we actually create the visualizations and output of those code snippets, right? So you have this sort of fully integrated holistic experience in one place. You don't have to be an engineer or a developer to make sense of it, to put the pieces together to make it into something that you can utilize. You can go to dune.com and you can actually see what other people are doing and look at the charts and they will update and there's sort of new information all the time. And so what we're trying to do is to really bake. So when we say community data platform, we try to bake collaboration into every single layer of the experience, whether that's like how we create the data sets to how you write queries. And instead of writing them yourself, like if someone already did it, maybe you just do a PR to what they did and you keep updating that instead of creating all these various versions of the same answering of questions. And then on the discovery side and on the social side, also like help people become discovered, help them build a persona and a stage and like build an audience for the work they're doing, which I think is an amazing democratization of analysts and people that are just curious. And a lot of them are anons that just like show up on the internet and end up doing cool things. And you don't have to get a job on Wall Street to be like a prominent analyst.
No, that's definitely fascinating in terms of like building the community and educating the space. We'll touch on this after. I just want to finish up on this part with regards to Dune Analytics. If you could take us through the difference between the query engine, so Dune SQL, versus Spellbook, the community data pipeline. Like, could you just briefly describe what exactly they are and why are they such game changers?
Yeah, so these are two products that we're building in-house, tailored and custom to crypto data. So Spellbook is what we call a community data pipeline. And essentially it's data transformations. So we have a bunch of technology and processes to take data out of the blockchain and structure it in some way. But there are a lot of sort of semantics on top of that. So, there could be a trade on Uniswap and a trade on 0x and a trade on, some other system. And they look a little bit different in the sort of the way the data comes onto the blockchain. But what we do and our community do together with us in the community data pipeline layer in the Spellbook is to cast spells, as we say, to create abstractions and unify these different data formats so that you get a data table that just says DEX trades and includes all of these different systems in one neat format, which means when you run analysis on top of it, to write the SQL, it's like 5 lines instead of like 500 lines, because you don't have to do all the data cleaning and curation yourself as an analyst. It's done collectively for the community, which is very, very powerful. And it's basically haven't been done before. Like we run this on some technology called DBT, which is typically used by enterprises in like closed environments. And so we're exposing these pipelines and ways of massaging and curating data publicly out there in the world, which is a novel new experience that we don't really know of anything similar. And then what we'll do with Dune SQL is to take a query engine, that you use to analyze data and traverse data and then serve results based on the SQL code that's curating it. But we're tailoring that to crypto data. So again, we have the opportunity to really know our data sets. Like most query engines will only be made for a very heterogeneous world of data sets. There are different types of data sets, formats, tables, all these things, and any query engine will kind of have to accommodate a lot of different needs. But since we are at a pretty significant scale, and we know the data set, it's the blockchain, we can really invest into the engine that interfaces with the blockchain, which I also think is pretty exciting. So we can make it cheaper, more convenient, have custom functions and ways of interacting with it that is cheap and fast and easy to use. And so those are a couple of major efforts that we're doing to realize our mission of making crypto data accessible and doing that in a bit of a bold way, not just taking off the shelf enterprise tools and putting some crypto data set on it, but really going the extra mile and really trying to change the game for how you can interact with this data.
Yeah, in terms of going the extra mile and really being a game changer, obviously the community members or the users of Dune Analytics are called the wizards. I'm kind of curious on your take on how you see wizards in 2018 versus 2023. For example, senior wizards, do you have types of ranks, similar to Gandalf? You have white Gandalf, gray Gandalf. And how do you educate your community? What are the different sorts of users? Are they really experts when it comes to data? Is it more crypto curious users that want to dive into data? How would you categorize these different types of wizards, and especially in the timeline of the past couple of years?
Yeah, so the way we think about what is a wizard is someone that is a highly engaged creator, someone that's really curious, really wants to understand and build. And we think it's powerful if we can really empower someone that really wants to do this and really wants to understand the data. That is kind of our strategy, as opposed to per se having a million very low effort creators. So we think that is the typical dynamics of a creative platform. So that's really, becoming a wizard is understanding mastering the craft of analyzing this data. And we try to make that as easy as possible. It's by no means a goal to make it complicated, but we try to make it a powerful experience so they can do wonderful things and create magic with this data. I think historically, or in the beginning, there were way more hobbyists and casual folks just poking around in nights and weekends type of things, just being a bit curious. And a few people doing it for their job, but it was more 50 people in the Telegram chat, just doing some queries and being a bit interested, and some had a crypto job, some not. I think what we're seeing now over time is there are more, let's say, professional users on Dune that actually work with this data for a living. They work for an organization that has a product on chain or interacts with the blockchain in some shape or form, or they're an investor in this world, and they try to really, go deeper and have more sophisticated needs. So what we're also spending a lot of time on these days is more collaboration in terms of team features and the ability for people to come together inside or outside of organizations. It can be formal or more casual, but letting people form groups and work together as a team and give them more professional tools. We're working on API products and various ways to make it more sophisticated for them.
So kind of different workshops to onboard new users. I wanted to ask you, when it comes to building a sustainable business model, obviously you have different subscription models and very generous when it comes to a free user. I think it's a free user has 10 private queries, a private dashboard, and a handful of CSV downloads. I'm just wondering how do you push this education for? I mentioned earlier Nate Silver, the author, he wrote The Signal and the Noise. Mm-hmm. And it's very hard when you have millions, if not billions, of data points, data entries. How do you see the signal from the noise, And it's true, as you mentioned, it's not even though you're trying to simplify it, it's not easy for any user. So what would you recommend to a new user that doesn't really know Dune Analytics? Where should he start, basically?
I think it's so we do as much as we can to help people get started. We have several tutorials. We recently did a massive overhaul of our docs, so it should now be easier to find out various ways to get started. But of course, one of the beauties of Dune is that you can look at what other people are doing. So if you have something you're interested in particular, it's a great idea to search for that and look into a dashboard and the underlying queries and see, okay, how was this retrieved? Maybe you fork it and then you have a look at, how someone else did it, and you try to change just like a tiny bit, and you start to get a sense for how it's working. We also have a very active Discord where there are people that will help you out. I think we've succeeded in making a culture of sort of pass it forward, and both me and my co-founder since the early days have been very hands-on, helping users succeed, trying to help them debug queries and make them learn. And we've kind of like brute forced someone even to like learn it when they were like, hey, can I get this in Excel? And it's like, no, but we can like teach you how to do it in SQL. And I think that has like, been baked into the spirit of the Dune community, that people are curious and they're keen to help others and make them succeed and show them the way. So that's been also fantastic to see. And I think it's something you will see if you go into the Dune Discord and ask a question and you're actually genuine and have tried and, really want help. I think then people will show up and try to help you out. So I think that both we try to make as much material as possible. We try to make the product as easy as possible. I think we have a bit of a way to go there to even further lower the barrier to get started. And then we try to foster a community of paying it forward and people helping each other.
Awesome. You wrote on Twitter recently that there are too many kind of vanity metrics in crypto. So I was wondering, I wanted to ask, what are the metrics that you're the most interested in? And also throughout the years, do you have any like favorite dashboards or analysis that were made? Any cool or fun examples to share?
Yeah, I think, crypto is trying to solve some bugs in the world, but some crypto people have a tendency to think that the sort of quote unquote legacy or established world like is only bugs, like 100% bugs. And I think that's wrong. I think like the world has actually figured out a fair amount of things. Maybe not everything, and maybe not like, the whole financial system. I think is pretty broken in many ways, but like some things are working. And for instance, I think if you look to like startup best practices, there's a lot of things to learn. So how do you know if your startup is doing well? Like basically you need some kind of engagement. You need to have a product that solves a problem. You need to measure how many people actually, get to solve that problem with your product. And then you want that to grow. So you want growth of that engagement, and then you want retention. You want people to come back to the product. And these things are pretty straightforward and established sort of playbooks for. And I don't think there's any reason why like most crypto startups shouldn't also look at these things, use the same frameworks and do those measurements of whether they're succeeding. And then you have things like TVL, which is like kind of weird because it's not actual engagement. And, there's this question of like, capital efficiency. Is it the goal in and of itself to put a ton of money into some system? Like maybe the goal is actually to put as little money as possible, but sort of utilize it as much as possible, the little money that is there. So there are a few of these metrics that's kind of like cumulative charts in like startup world. Like you don't want to do like a cumulative chart of users. Like all investors are like big red flag. If you're like, oh, here's a cumulative chart that can't go down, like that's like a non-starter. You need to see that like there's an ongoing growing engagement and traction. So I think that's in general, how I think about it. Like don't overcomplicate it, pick the battles. And
so in terms of like dashboards or data in general, what piques your interest? I mean, sometimes you kind of joke around on Twitter where you're saying, oh, look, Rolex prices are going down while wine never goes down. So what's the kind of data that you have fun playing with, or that you're like impressed, or sometimes you see, oh, wow, this is really cool. I didn't know about this.
I think one of the coolest dashboard that's made the biggest impact on me, and then maybe back to my previous point about not reinventing the wheel too much on things that might be working, is when MakerDAO created like a financial statement on Dune. So they have like a profit and loss statement, a balance sheet, but written in Dune SQL queries as a live dashboard on Dune. So you can see, okay, here's a bank essentially, and here are the revenues. Here are the costs. They have all of this on chain, and here's our operating margin. And this is like real time, block by block. And this is like the big inspiration for a post I did a while ago. The revolution will not be reported quarterly, where you can like literally, see a feed of a financial statement, but it's not a quarterly PDF. It's a real time thing.
Do you think that other projects should adopt, try the same as MakerDAO? Like, should the financial statements be on chain? Because we all know that in Web2 traditionally, sometimes we play with numbers when it comes to financial sheets. So should that information be on chain for you? Like, is that like a perfect example of a good direction to go, or what are the things to be careful about?
I think that depends a little bit on the project and the structure. And I think obviously Maker is like one of these like very pioneering DAOs and proper on-chain organizations, right? So I'm not saying per se that you have to do that or put everything on chain or whatever. But I think that the interesting thing is that these are like really healthy metrics to track. And so I would encourage, if you do have a financial product like and it's some kind of bank or lending facility, like your balance sheet is gonna matter. So like do track it and do be aware of like, the exposure and all of these things. And I think what we've seen obviously in the last crash is that a lot of at least the non-on-chain financial players, they mismanaged their balance sheets and funds in a horrible way, and it had catastrophic consequences. And so I think a lesson there to learn is like, okay, the grown folks in the room have learned something about managing risk and managing these type of operations, and I think it makes sense to have a lot of this stuff on chain, but like let's not necessarily reinvent the wheel on how to manage risk, even though it might be in a different environment. It might be on chain, but yeah.
With the rise of artificial intelligence, like how do you see analyzing blockchain data through AI evolve? Like, what are your thoughts? Will it become mainstream? Any plans to kind of implement with like Dune with AI? Like, how do you see the future playing out? Not in the coming weeks, but really in the coming 2-3 years.
Yeah. Well, first of all, this is definitely a massive technology paradigm shift. And frankly, we at Dune have never been like super focused on AI historically, but now it's like incredibly clear that this is a massive new thing. And you need to take it seriously. And I think when you build a business and build a technology company, you need to be alert and on it when things like this happen. So we are definitely embracing this. We have put out an AI large language model roadmap that you can find on our blog. We have shipped one feature to production that's explain query. So there's a little button at the bottom of any SQL query on Dune that you can click, and you can see natural language explanation of queries that are on Dune, so you can help to understand what's happening. And then we are also piloting and working on natural language querying, so that you can write questions, plain text into Dune, and you can get answers. And I think this is extremely promising and interesting. I think it's a little bit unclear exactly how long it will take to make it super useful and make it not make annoying mistakes or sort of, not give you the answer you'd expect, or make it so that you don't have to debug it. But I think what's really cool here is, so we, as I alluded to earlier, have always been focused on sort of power users, and we have a SQL interface and these things. And there's previously never really been a super compelling path to like bridging over into like a way larger audience, being able to create queries. And historically, the answer has been like drag and drop interfaces, which I think has proven to be, or our perspective is that it's like pretty hard to build that into a compelling product. It's like too complicated to use for someone that's not technical, but it's definitely not flexible and powerful enough for someone that actually are a bit technical or willing to learn a little bit of SQL. So it's been like a bit of a tough thing to see the promise of. But now suddenly we have this technology that can sort of, even though we're centered in this sort of SQL centric way, there's a plausible bridge to like a way bigger audience being empowered to get answers to arbitrary analysis questions. So that's very, very exciting.
When it comes to then Dune Analytics, you briefly mentioned it. Obviously, there's been so many successes and milestones. At this moment in time, like, what would you say is the main blocker or hurdles that you need to overcome? Is it just mass adoption, education? What would be the biggest obstacle that you see?
For Dune specifically?
You know what? Let's say for Dune and for the crypto space. Let's have both answers.
Yeah, for Dune, the way I think about it a little bit is like, we're kind of like building a ladder, and the further up the ladder a user goes, the more powerful things they can do, and the higher up, like the more they achieve, and they can sort of get on this journey. I think the way we have built the product now on our side is there's a little bit of like missing steps at the bottom of the ladder in particular, which means like you kind of have to make a jump to get started and get going. And that is something I really want us to fix, that like you can easily take one step at a time and like go smoothly up the ladder without sort of any sketchy, terrifying jumps. So that's one thing. We're also definitely working more on making Dune for teams a success, or letting people.
You mean like a team, a group of people, right?
Group of people working together, yes. So we have launched version history. We're working on query PRs. We're working on better content management. We have sort of team functionality already, but we're working on making that better to work together. So that's another exciting bucket of things we're working on. And then lastly, there's, I would say, also APIs and letting people take data from Dune into way more environments and build with Dune, do more use cases, because there's only so much we can enable inside of the Dune application. So I think that's also like a massive new category that we're excited about building in, and it's still a little bit early.
And so when it's not Dune Analytics, what are your kind of guilty pleasures in Web3? Like, is it still data, music, NFTs, DeFi, gaming? Like, when Frederick is not the co-founder of Dune Analytics, what is he doing on the side, and how is he having fun?
So I will say I still find it really mind-blowing to just do transactions on chain still, even though I've been doing this for a few years now. Like, knowing that I can just like sign a signature from my wallet on my computer, post it onto this network, and I can like see it on Dune, I can see it on Etherscan. I sent someone somewhere else, money or something. I think is a pretty mind-blowing thing, that when it's still early, it's still like pretty bare bones technology and experience, but it's pretty incredible that there's a system that's been working now for, I don't know, 8 years or something, that just like lets me interact sort of financially with anyone directly on the internet. So that in and of itself like continues to amaze me and excite me. And so I'm frankly not like massive on NFTs. So I've been pretty busy building Dune over the last few years. But there's a project I really like called Heaven Computer, which is very like 90s-esque. Like their website is a Windows 95-ish interface, and it's kind of quirky, kind of abstract, sort of glitchy GIFs as visuals, but it has a very nice sort of wrapped world around it, and the whole browser interface they have on their site, heaven.computer, is fun. And I'm not I think I own like 1 or 2 of these, so I'm not like pumping my bags, but I just think it's a fun, well done creative project.
There's a term that was thrown around a bit, and it's also like data NFTs. Like, do you have a thought on this or not really? Like, for example, having data sets, like, do you think that would be an interesting solution, or you think that it's a bit weird to talk about a data set as a data NFT?
Again, like, some of these things is just like, what problem are you solving? I think, in the NFT land, I think there are a lot of art and a lot of quirky, weird projects that I think make sense, because they're an expression of like human creativity and just like people poking around, and in some shape or form, having an expression that resonates with people and have, different sets of values and whatever to come together. And I think that makes sense. I think it's like oh, it's just like dumb is such a intellectually lazy critique, because like, yeah, all art is dumb. Like I have some circles on this like co-working space. Like, should I go around and like be angry at those because someone put like some kind of art on the wall? So that's that. But I think when it comes to, okay, so data NFTs is like, what's the problem you're trying to solve? So for instance, with Dune, what we do is like, we try to solve problems and we try to be efficient and smart in how we solve those problems. And like data is a like typically costly thing in like computer wise. If you want to do something with data, it's expensive. You need compute. Like storing it is somewhat cheap. Retrieving it and massaging it and doing things with it is relatively expensive. So a blockchain, I think, is mostly suited for like very minimal programs and simple logic and like not compute intensive programs like finance and like, some ownership ideas and NFTs and these things that are minimal in their expression in terms of what they cost from a computer. But data, on the other hand, is like pretty much on the different end of the scale. So then the question just becomes, why put it on chain? Like what you gain from it? And that's not to say that there's like nothing interesting there, but I think that the question is just like, what are the things you're trying to solve and what are the properties of a system you need to solve those problems?
When we talk about like databases and processing data, if we're talking about billions and billions of entries, do you think that blockchain in its current state were or ready to process this data? When it comes to digital identities and other things. When we look at centralized, AWS, for example, with data, it's instant. There's a lot of problems, but we can't complain about the speed, right? So do you think that we're at a stage where the more we're going to have users, are we ready for this influx of data?
So I think there are a lot of promising and exciting ways of scaling blockchains, and there's a lot of progress there in general. But I think blockchains will remain like a high cost sort of computing environment relative to most other things. If you want to do something super cheap, then you probably don't want to use a blockchain. Like there needs to be something that is so important that you're willing to like pay a little bit extra to have it on the blockchain. So I mean, it all depends on like, is it the actual data that's there? There are different like architectures and you can reference a piece of data. And so, I mean, there are a bunch of systems, and I'm not saying they're not interesting per se, but I don't see a world anytime soon where like quote unquote big data sort of lives on the blockchain in a meaningful way.
Great. Final question. Any shout out inspirations lately, either project or a person, or is there any question that I haven't asked that you want to touch upon?
So this week I was very inspired by the OG VC Fred Wilson, who had a post on, there's a lot of skepticism around this industry now. There's been some bad stuff like FTX, and it's like understandably not a super positive sentiment, frankly. But at the same time, all the same promises of the technology that was there a year ago and 2 years ago and 5 years ago, they're still true. The reason why I went into this space, there's nothing that's happened that's like debunked the things I believe in around building an open financial system. But what Fred Wilson said under some of the scrutiny was, when they tried to shut it down, double down. And basically his point was, that when powerful technologies would always threaten some establishment in some shape or form. And that is, the exciting things, the powerful things, the things that really disrupt are the things that really take the world forward eventually. And so I found that to be a very inspiring quote, and maybe needed these days when it might seem like, what's the point of all of this, and should we be doing this? And he's a very experienced investor, and he's like, yes, absolutely. When things get dark like this, that's when you really double down.
So would you say Dune is like a necessary threat, right? You double down. Thank you so much, Frederick, for joining us on today's episode. And yeah, links for Dune Analytics and Fredriks will be in the description. As for us, any likes or follows are appreciated. On Twitter, it's NEWFORUM_NCO. Thank you again, Frederick, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. My pleasure.